Happy Wednesday, Internet. It's Enrique Gutierrez here of Sync.io, bringing you all the fun-filled, fancy footwork and talk of the cryptocurrency markets. I'm joined today by a special guest, PALcapital's James Haft, and we'll be talking about what he's doing in the markets to help people get into crypto. And then we're also going to give a little bit of banter about Facebook's Libra, what we think about that, and also Bakkt, maybe give us some snapshots of the market and see how things go. It is just me today, just me and James. Nick is at a conference, Dave is in a meeting, and Dewey's in the shadows. So we'll still have a party though. It'll still be fun and exciting times for us because Bitcoin is not boring today. I know. Contrary to popular belief, right? I mean, I did say about a month ago that drops below $10,000 are going to be kind of rare, and boy, when it decided to prove me wrong on that one, it, well, really wanted to prove it wrong. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, James Haft. Let's make sure he's not muted. There we go. How you doing, James?
Hey, how are you?
Doing great. So to kick this off, we got, first off, PALcapital. Let's tell the people what it is. That'll be the easiest way to start this off. Not only what PALcapital is, but how you got involved in this stuff and why crypto is so fascinating. So huge mouthful. Give us the story, though. I want to hear it.
Sure. Hope everyone can stay awake. So I guess the best way to start is my background. I've been doing emerging markets, banking, and liquidity strategies for 30 years. I started at Bear Stearns in the mid 1980s, and I was working in the Latin American corporate finance group when someone walked in the door. It was Jimmy Kane, who was the vice chairman, and he said, "Who wants to go to Asia?" And all the intelligent people in the room sat on their hands, and I, being the young guy in the room, said, "What the hell? It can't be worse than this." So I got on a plane, I went out to Hong Kong, and I opened the office for Bear Stearns in Hong Kong in 1989. The day I landed was Tiananmen Square. So I land, I go to the Conrad Hotel, I turn on TV, there's a guy standing in front of a tank. There's people protesting in the streets. And I call up the home office and I say, "It's time to come home." And they say, "Forget it, stay there and figure it out."
Oh, wow.
So I ended up staying, and it was very interesting traveling around, learning about the disinformation programs of the Chinese government, and what was really happening on the ground. And what I found was that the people were capitalists, and they really wanted to do deals. They wanted to access the United States. And they wanted to learn more about how you act as an independent business unit. We ended up taking public the first company in China to list on the New York Stock Exchange. It was a motorcycle company that was half owned by the Chinese military and half owned by a foreign Chinese company called CP Pokpan. So I created the structure where you could list the shares of a Chinese company through an intermediate holding company in the British Virgin Islands, then float that on the New York Stock Exchange. That became the first company out of China to be listed and traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I then went on and did 4 or 5 more deals like that. Almost everyone's copied that format for the last 30 years.
Wow.
And I learned a lot because in the middle of that transaction, the Chinese government came to me and said, "Okay, how do we make money at this?" And I said, "Well, you don't make money here. We're selling other people's equity." And they said, "Okay, this is definitely illegal. IPOs are illegal." And they posted an article in the South China Morning Post, and they declared IPOs are illegal, and Bear Stearns and America are trying to steal from us again.
Oh, wow.
So we went back and started negotiating, and I explained, listen, you can tax the transaction, you can make a list of deals that can go through, and you can create the order because the SEC won't approve deals that you don't approve. So you can get control of the queue, and you can make money on the transactions. And that's exactly what happened with Bitcoin 2-3 years ago when Chinese decided it was illegal.
Yeah.
It was that they couldn't control the queue, and they didn't know how they made money. And one of the funny things we learned back then, and this is definitely news for the something to listen to for the audience, is that when the Chinese government outlaws something, the first thing you should do is buy it, because there's a reason they're outlawing it, and it's not because they think it's warm and fuzzy and they're really happy it's there. And so if you look at the path of how capital flows were developed into China in the 1990s, you look at where we are now in the global markets, I think you see an opportunity. for cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, relating to how China will start to accumulate capital and deal in the capital markets, over the next decade. I then moved to Latin America, where I ran ING Barings, Latin American equity capital markets, again focusing on international and emerging markets liquidity strategies. And then I did a little bit of work in Russia for one of the oligarchs, who unfortunately ended up funding Trump. And I decided in 1996 I didn't want to be in Russia, and I also figured that emerging markets were beginning to become predictable to me and how they worked. And I started to think that technology was the next emerging market. It wasn't going to be a geographic location, but that the technology markets as emerging markets would act the same as the geographic markets, because the participants are human beings, and human beings act the same. If it's tulips, if it's Bitcoin, if it's China, if it's cars, if it's cell phones, it doesn't matter. The boom and the bust has to do with the people, not with the asset. So I started focusing on businesses that would benefit from the digitization of information. And back then in 1996, everyone looked at me and said, "That's crazy. That's not a business." Now everyone says to me, "That's crazy. That's not a definition, because that's every business."
Yeah.
And so in 1996, formed PALcapital Pacific Alliance Limited, which was focused on these companies that would benefit from digitization of information. And I noticed a trend. I saw that I'm a science fiction reader, and Neil Stephenson is pretty much my guide. So if you read Snow Crash, you read Green D, or you read Cryptomicon, you really can see that he predicted everything that's happening right now in terms of politics, society, and the economy and currency, and how technology would play with that. And that really was my theory back then. And I noticed that computers had been given a common language to relate with each other, and that was the first stage of digitization, was the computers talking to each other, but there was nothing for them to talk about. Yeah. So then people started to digitize information, make it available on the internet, and it was cool. You could click on things, and things would change on your screen, and it was very interesting. But people started to look at it and say, "Listen, that's great, but what am I going to do with that?" So then we came to the digitization of commerce, and people were saying, interesting, but who's going to put their credit card on the internet? That's ridiculous. And Amazon, that's a joke. That'll never be a business, right? And so we know where those things went.
Of course.
And so, in the interim, I founded Condo.com, which is the largest marketplace for marketing condominiums globally, using a hub and spoke model. And I was lucky enough to form the largest fund in Latin America, focused on entrepreneurship, which now it's called NXTP Labs. Is now funded by the World Bank with $50 million to create entrepreneurship community in Latin America. And down there, I really learned about community. So we get to the digitization of commerce. We know where that went, and the boom that it created on the internet, and the boom and the bust cycles that went through. But the general growth and the change that happened in international GDP because of the ease of transactions from the internet. The next phase, which is the phase we're in now, is the digitization of value. So once you can digitize value, then you can take a lot of the friction out of the process, and you can start to get to the places where in science fiction you looked at the breaking of the physical boundaries and the changes in the political, social, religious, and economic realities, and how they could be implemented by individuals, with or without the support of the nation states and the existing centralized authorities. So where we are now is we've gone through digitization of communication, digitization of information, digitization of commerce, now digitization of value. And you're starting to see that now as people start to tokenize the liquidity of assets, leaving the assets in place. And now all of a sudden you can make mobile what were previously immobile, illiquid assets and create markets there. And I believe that all this is happening not because of technology. I believe it's happening all because of human nature. And humanity's desire to decentralize. If you look at most of the problems that we have politically and socially and in religion and education, you'll see that most of them come from centralization and from centralized authorities telling people what to think and telling them how to behave. To me, there's no fundamental reason that a person in Gaza can't talk to a person in Israel, or that a person in Russia can't do business with a person in the United States. We really don't have any relationship with our governments. Right? So when I go to a conference in Malta and I talk to a guy from Nigeria and he wants to talk with a guy from China, and we do a three-way handshake, on an understanding, while that makes perfect sense as individuals, it's in contravention of all sets of laws for banking and for legality of transactions. And I think that's the next wall that's being broken down. So my business has been based on having this concept. I wouldn't call it a vision, but I'd call it a concept going forward, and kind of watching it roll down the tracks, and then try to create liquidity strategies for entrepreneurs and for investors who can take advantage of what I think will be driving strategies and driving realities over the next decade.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so agree with literally every facet of the concepts. The desire to be decentralized, the need for what is basically a reappropriation of the custodianship of value, right, on an individual level, which has been given to people who do not deserve it. They've shown that they do not deserve the custodianship or responsibility time and again. And you mentioned some bangers in there with you touched lightly on the 2008 housing crisis. You touched lightly on the .com bubble, and that's when heavy institutions actually got really invested into something and tried to reap the rewards ahead of actuality, ahead of reality, to basically inflate their own value in that regard, because greed, the human nature of greed, is so strong that even if you are an institution and you have a responsibility to the individual as an organization, it's not as cool as getting that new Lambo and nice yacht. So it's great to actually see that you guys are focused on one of the core moments, one of the core characteristics of cryptocurrency in general is to decentralize, obviously, but more importantly to transfer or allow the individual to reappropriate the custodianship of value, which went away with the gold standard, really, to be honest. I mean,
I put two things. The first thing is it's not just greed, it's fear and greed.
Yeah.
And so, and those act, in elastic fashion to bounce us along a pendulum swing, back and forth as we march through time. And I think that's really, if you look at history, you'll see that people, there's Amari's law. We, underestimate the impact of technology in the short run, or we overestimate in the short run and we underestimate in the long run. Mm-hmm. And so while everyone's, fretting around the fact that Bitcoin went up 1,000 or down 1,000, if you looked at Amazon from 1996 when I first started to now, you'd see it's up around 1,800, 1,900%. And it's a beautiful curve. But if you remember back in 1999, that stock was going from 5 to 100 to 5. And it was going from bankrupt to the most important story in the world back to bankrupt again, in a matter of weeks. And now you look at the chart and you can't find those gut-wrenching movements. Don't matter, in the context of time. And I think we're the same thing happening right now with Bitcoin. People are making the mistake, because it seems like so much is happening, to think that we've even started what's the impact of crypto on the global economy. And the truth is we haven't. Crypto is completely irrelevant in the landscape today. Right? So, there's corporations that are bigger than Bitcoin. Right now we're just waiting to see where it starts and where the traction is. This is a time where you get burned or make a fortune, but it's pretty much luck, because we don't really know what's happening yet. And we're really waiting to see where the adoption is. And I have a theory about that. We're all looking at tokens and investment strategies, mm-hmm. And I think it's way too early for that. I also think that it may never happen, and not in a negative way, and not to be a naysayer. I just think that tokens are not going to be the thing. I think tokens are going to end up being important to computers and to transactions between computers as transactions tend to be driven by AI in the future. Mm-hmm. And that you'll see that tokens are important to create the economies and remove friction from transactions. that individuals won't know that they're dealing with tokens at all. There'll be one or two intermediate tokens, maybe like Bitcoin, maybe Praxis, which David Chaum's working on as the next level. But not. But I don't believe that you'll have 10,000 currencies in a wallet that you'll be paying attention to. I mean, right now, I'm a world traveler. I've been on 5 continents in the last 4 months, and I have one currency in my pocket, maybe sometimes, right? Yeah. Right? And so, when I travel, I don't even carry the local currency. I use my credit card and I use my Apple Pay. Yeah. And so I think the tokens are going to be like currencies, and that you don't really use them, that they're used in micro economies, that we'll start to access things through our phone, and that our phone will look the same now, that it looks the same in the future that it does now. And you just won't know that you're dealing with tokenized data. You'll just care that you get what you're asking for, that you can see and control and custody your assets, and that you'll be able to do the same things today that you want to do in the future. In terms of day-to-day life.
That argument can directly translate to speak right through the viewers and understanding something. But right now, like the way that they're consuming this video is through an XMPP protocol over a Facebook, media routing system, and it's being delivered over a TCP/IP connection with TCP and UDP ports. No one is going to invest in TCP token, UDP token, XMPP token, or RTMP for the audio. They don't care that it's AC3, like all these things, as much as they do care about being able to consume the content wherever they're at, on their iPad, on their phone, on their laptop, or on their desktop, or whatever. How the data gets to you, how the value in the future gets to you, what you're saying is not necessarily important. Like, we don't really care if authorized.net processes our Visa transaction. We just care that the transaction is valid and it actually reports back correctly, and we can get our goods and services and trade for our money, right?
Right. I mean, what I talk about in my marketing pitch when I'm talking to Fortune 500 companies about how to get involved, the first thing I say is, please stop using the word blockchain. Just say it's a database that's faster, cheaper, more secure, offers better data, and has a non-transmittable ledger, which are all benefits, and only a fool wouldn't do it. And there's no reason to say. You never mention when you go on your Chase app, you have no idea what database they use. You have no idea what transaction layers use. You don't even know what currency they're transacting. So, and you don't ask, because the truth is, we don't care, right? If the service works and gives me what I want for the price I want it makes me happy, I don't care if it's mice running around with notes in their mouth in a dark room, right? It's just as long as it works.
It's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. The opposite side of that aspect, there is a layer of, from the technology aspect, 100% true. From the financial aspect, in some regards, it's also true, but it can't be universally applied, because there is a situation where you will care if you have Amazon stock versus a stock, right? So crypto, while the word blockchain, absolutely, technologically standing, doesn't actually matter. Proof of God knows what, like
crypto's work.
Yeah, right. But when you get into the actual value transaction of something, like the currency that you're holding in your wallet, it does matter if it's USD versus Euro versus CAD versus yen and stuff. There is a limit to that.
And there will be transactional mediums.
Yeah.
And there will be units of account. I do not believe that the United States dollar is going to survive the current administration.
That is a highly probable outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
So, if I was China, or I was Russia, or I was Turkey, or even if I was the EU at this point, and I had a choice not to use the US dollar as my unit of account, I'd bolt for the door pretty fast.
Oh yeah, guaranteed. It's down in its value overall since the 1930s. I mean, everything is really, honestly, but in terms of its strength in the global economy, we focused way too much on the Eastern Bloc in Russia, while China has done a really kick-ass job at expanding their reach in places like Africa and other emerging markets that are, as you mentioned earlier, geographically opportunistic, even though it's not an emerging market per se, but it is there is a lot of gaps to fill in terms of the infrastructure and the economic leverage that you can put into Africa and South America, right? There's still opportunities there for a power to come in and do great things to it. And the United States didn't.
But the tipping point, you never know what humans don't know something's happened until after it's happened.
Yeah.
And China's pretty much kicking our ass in Africa, and Africa is, represents a big piece of the alpha over the next decade. It's a lot of people. Truthfully, they're ahead of us in terms of cryptocurrency or in terms of understanding how to get around issues created by lousy fiat currencies.
Yes.
Right. And so, to me, the first cryptocurrency wasn't exactly a cryptocurrency, but it was minutes on cell phone systems in Africa. There's a company called M-Pesa, which basically ended up becoming a bank because as people in Zimbabwe and other countries with hyperinflation, where it was illegal to hold dollar-denominated assets, they were stockpiling iron and steel in their backyards, which is kind of impractical to protect against rampant inflation. Then they figured out, hey, a cell phone minute is just as good as a bar of steel. And so they started to basically stockpile cell phone minutes and buy as many cell phone minutes as they could, using that as their bank account. And then stores started taking the cell phone minutes as currency. And so, that looks a lot like, Bitcoin to me.
It actually is just a computer-powered digital asset that buys you space on a database. That's exactly what it is.
That's not controlled by the authority who's issuing and tampering with your fiat currency.
Yeah, not nearly as decentralized as most people would like it value to be, but at the same time, in practice, what that is describing is basically that the need for countries without reliable fiat systems have already utilized alternative means for being able to transact value between one another. And Africa has had that need and has thus advanced on comfortable nations where we have the US dollar and the euro and things of that nature to buy our coffee with, right?
Right, but and also that it's I believe everything's fractals. It's all, once you understand a little piece of the puzzle, you tend to understand that the big puzzle because it all has to work together. So that M-Pesa example really is the first example of what we call now a stable coin. And I don't like the word stablecoin. I don't think it's accurate. Most stablecoins are really just tethers to the US dollar or to some other asset. So they're not stablecoins. What they are is purchasing power parity coins. Where you choose what the parity is to. But that was the first example of one of these types of tools, which again is run by consumer driven and created not by technology but by human.
So, taking all this into account, I'm really curious about we're obviously pre-early adopter. This is innovator / pioneer stage for the consumer side of things, and even for the institution side of things in terms of crypto. They stare at the retail market of crypto. They stare at the technology of blockchain. There's people attempting things for case studies in the blockchain space, normally in logistics, right? Food transport with ING doing their bit last year. And people are dipping their feet into it. So all that aside from where we're at, what are your feelings on, there's obviously a few million people that are paying attention to the retail side of crypto, right? Institutions and consumers alike. What are your thoughts on that climate, and where do you see it 12 months from now? In terms of the evolution of it, because I don't think that we're going to see Bitcoin and the brand of the top tier assets or whatever, the tokens, vanish in the next year or even 3 or 5 years, 10 years maybe. But next year, this time we have another 12 months in front of us. What does the climate of people's attention of crypto, institution or consumer or both, look like to you? What do you think?
Well, first of all, the movements in these types of markets, they're not smooth and predictable. Yeah. And so, we've gotten accustomed to this concept of black swan. I don't think black swans are really black swans. I think they're just no one's paying attention until you're paying attention. Yeah. And so, but I think they're predictable if you think about the context. So, I believe there will be a day in the next, if I say decade, I'm very safe. I think it's sooner than then, but let's say decade so I don't look that foolish.
That's fair.
Where you'll open up the newspaper or Apple News or wherever you consume your news from, and you'll say, damn, I wish I had Bitcoin. And so, but you just don't know what that day is. And history shows if you miss that day, you miss 50 to 70% of the upside in the bull market. And so you kind of have to be invested and be ready for it. I don't think that we're gonna know when that event is. I think it's going to be geopolitically driven. I think I don't think that the current status of nation states and political and tax and military boundaries are defensible or over the long term, over that same 10-year period.
Yeah.
I just think it doesn't work anymore. If you look at the drone attacks that just happened in Saudi Arabia, regardless of who did it, it's just obvious. It's just obvious, right? And so, and again, I go back to Neil Stephenson, who talked about nanotechnology, in 1995, and how impossible it would be to defend against a swarm of little drones that coordinate with each other. And so, the reality is that we're not safe. The United States acts as if the physical boundaries that separate us from other countries makes us safe, and so that we can be, so we can be, let's just call it hawkish to be nice. About how we deal with other people, thinking that there will be no retaliation. I think that's foolish. I think it's very easy to bring a bunch of drones into Philadelphia and look at the LNG ports, or some other infrastructure. And I think we're very vulnerable. So I think that we're not going to have a choice of how we comfortably want to move into this. I think it's going to be that our realities start to shift and shift faster than we like, and shift the moment we take our eye off the ball, unfortunately. So I think you have to be thinking about that from some perspective. In terms of, if we would say there was no geopolitical risk, we'd say that there's no exogenous shocks. We want to talk about what would happen if this was a smooth curve. I believe that the adoption of these technologies are going to be driven by corporations in the short run, not by individuals. That's another reason why I don't believe tokens are relevant, because tokens get sold to individuals who are supposed to use them, and they're not going to. What's going to happen, the key to the future right now is to understand that again, because of humanity, that capitalism is going to have to change over the next 10 years. The way capitalism is currently defined is the race towards a monopoly, right? You basically try and seek monopoly as hard as you can, and you get your unfair advantage, and then you leverage the hell out of your community until they dislike you so much, but they have no choice but to stay with you. And you create laws and fees and all kinds of crap, and you make it so you can't leave even though you really want to. And that's just not a sustainable way for humans to relate to each other over time. And humans are going to revolt. And one of the revolts is the decentralization movement of crypto. And so, I think that in the short run, you're going to see corporations adopt, because the real power in the future is going to be in community. It's going to be in the number of people that you have and the number of transactions and value that you can bring onto a system that become habituated into people's behavior. And that's going to be easier and easier to do outside of corporate governance, outside of current governance modalities, outside of corporations and their control, the stranglehold that they have on us today. I think that those are going to start to erode. And as that happens, you'll have a new form of capitalism. And I don't want to, it's very quick for people to say, well, it's not capitalism, it's socialism, or it's this or it's that. And I think that those titles, I think those labels are no longer relevant. I think those are concepts from the 1950s. Exactly. And so I believe that the future will be the formation of communities that are incentivized to behave and participate in ecosystems where the benefits are shared with those people who participate, as opposed to centralized into the 0.0001%. And that's going to be that people start to opt into those systems, even if they're slightly disadvantageous, because they'd rather have control and pay a price for that control than the ease that they have now, which is kind of like a narcotic. But keep paying the fees. Don't worry about what you just signed. Oh, don't worry, you'll never have to pay the price for that, right? And I think we're starting to realize, well, you do pay the price for it, and people are taking your information and using you as the product. And I think that that's something which has to stop. And so I think there will be a rotation from corporations who use blockchain and crypto first to their advantage because it's faster, cheaper, better data, et cetera. And then you'll start to see competing systems come about. And then you're going to see a continued push and pull between legacy and future systems. And I think in the long run, it's going to be very hard to stop the march towards decentralization.
And that, I mean, it very directly speaks to Libra, obviously, right? That's what we're getting at. I wanted to mention one thing, and you mentioned it with the whole coordinated drone attacks that you cannot fight against. And I don't know if you're into movies at all, but I did watch the Gerard Butler film Angel Has Fallen recently because my wife loves Gerard Butler. Anyways, at the beginning, the opening sequence of this whole thing is they had domestic terrorists had gotten their hands on a swath of drones, basically, that attacked an entire Secret Service, outfit on a river in, I think it was Camp David or something like that, to basically try to assassinate the president. And it was unstoppable because you got these guys with their little, Secret Service handguns versus these, C4 outfitted drones falling out of the sky, and they have embedded facial recognition software in them, and it's, action movie stuff. But that's actually not that far out of the realm of possibilities for what could happen, and actually does happen in wars currently, right? Where you do have drones doing recon, you have drones doing missile strikes, and then small drones doing surveillance and things of that nature, and weaponizing that stuff is not that hard with its current state. So it sounds like sci-fi, but honest to God, it's the stuff that we have. Not sci-fi, but it's stuff that's available right now in the military complex, and in some levels in the civilian complex, because you can get your hands on drones, you could do things with them as a consumer.
Without question. Without question. And again, I don't think it's sci-fi anymore, right? I'm not a military expert, and I've done no, due diligence on what happened in Saudi Arabia last week. But I don't believe those were done by civilian drones. I think those were done by military drones.
They were done by military drones, for sure.
But having said that, we're just not that far off. And to sit there and think it's the future, I think is a mistake. And we have to rethink what this does. This is just another form. Remember fractals. This is just another form of decentralization, right? This is I no longer need an aircraft carrier which centralizes power and delivers it around. I can basically put a bunch of drones in my backpack and deliver my package. This is I no longer have to have the troops moving around, and I don't have to have the big budget. Historically, for the last 100 years, our big budget has been our strongest defense mechanism. And I'm just not sure that that's going to be relevant and protect us going forward.
And switching gears right back, this is the fun and friendly part of the conversation, but switching gears over to Libra real quick. I mean, let's pretend
that's the fun and friendly part.
let's pretend that it actually comes to fruition, that it does see the light of day, and whatever Facebook calls its association, Facebook launches Libra. I don't care what shadow company they attach to it. And they have access to a very large economic bucket of individuals that, even though it's coming from a centralized place, they claim it being decentralized because it's not attached to a governing body, even though you could philosophically argue that Facebook is actually a governing body, but whatever. So in the effect of Libra being one of the most tangible brands to launch towards the decentralized, away from U.S. government fiat system, living inside of a corporation with the reach to actually be able to execute on it at scale and harm fiat currencies and be a competitor, like a viable competitor. Not Monero being a viable competitor for money laundering in the U.S. dollar, because nothing's beating the U.S. dollar when it comes to money laundering right now, right? I mean, hands down, they got that market on lock. But
I love that. Look at all the drug deals.
Yeah, right. So black market aside, not being taken over by privacy coins, like when it comes to Libra competing against a fiat currency, I mean, the fear is actually there, right? Some European countries, I think it was France, actually voiced a concern, say they put a stop on Facebook, do not do this kind of thing, and we need to launch an investigation and all this other stuff. Like the next day, they came out with that notice about it towards it, and they were freaking out, right?
Let's unpack this whole thing.
Yeah.
First of all, back to what we were talking about before, fractals. Why is Facebook so dangerous? Why is Libra so dangerous? Because of the size of their community, right? It's the biggest community in the world except humanity.
Yeah.
Right, and it goes across, again, just fractals. It goes across nation states. It's not necessarily. It's going to be unmanageable from a regulatory perspective if they choose to be. They could possibly bring in anonymity. So has all the things that scares the hell out of the legacy political system and economic system. Just a minor interjection here. I don't think Libra is going to happen in its current form because I think they made a critical mistake. They never should have come out and said it was a currency.
Good call.
They should have said that it was points, and you now transact in points, and a point is worth $1, right? Mm-hmm. And then when everyone's hooked on their points and they're offering discounts on them and they're printing their own and they're doing the whole thing of a fiat currency, they then should have said, ta-da, you can use it wherever you want, and here's your new wallet, and it works at Chase, right? But they didn't do that. They had too much ego. And so I think they made a critical mistake, and I think that they stuck their stick into the hornet's nest a little too early. Having said that, if I go away from that premise and I follow your question about what do I think happens here, would happen. I think that the world is hungering for a non-political unit of account and transaction where you are no longer subject to the political whims of countries determining the value and usability of your own assets. I believe that we are all right now striving for self-sovereignty of everything. Absolutely. Right? I want self-sovereignty of my identity. I want self-sovereignty over my information. I want self-sovereignty over my possessions. I want self-sovereignty over my relationships. Right? And this is really what this is all about, is why do I need to tell the government or governments who I am, where I live, and give them 17 documents so I can send $10,000 to you?
Oh, man.
Right?
I would love to be able to have the freedom, because we're a global business. As the creators of Sync, we have offshore development teams to help offset costs, and also I've worked with these guys for years, and I will fight tooth and nail to keep them with me as comrades in the technology space. But sending them, God forbid our costs were to ever balloon to the point where we would get a flag from anybody. Right. The team's small, thank God. But if we ever needed to grow, if the business needed to scale, I would be in a world of hurt because of the bodies. It's like, granted, we're working in the Philippines too, and their current president isn't exactly the most favorable individual when it comes to working with foreign bodies of business, regardless. But like our current president and his administration bubble wrap is ridiculous and completely. I mean, granted, it's been a long road coming, and it's been constantly changing into this hoops and balances stuff. That if you have enough lawyers, you can get around. But if you're just me, I'm not, this isn't like, I'm a software engineer. You know what I mean? I don't have a team of lawyers with me to help me figure out how to be Mitt Romney when it comes to shoveling money around the planet. So like being able to do that would be fantastic.
These laws, they're not about what they're telling you about. This is the problem, right? Yeah. So the limit of $9,999 in the United States, it's not about terrorism, right? It's not about drugs, right? It makes no sense at all. If you want to do transactions in drugs, do dollars. They're much more anonymous than any currency, right? And the idea that individuals fund terrorism is ridiculous.
Absolutely
right?
Ridiculous.
Nation states fund terrorism, right? And so, the idea that they have to make sure I don't send $11,000, it just makes no sense. And so it's not about terrorism. It's not about drugs. It's about taxation and control. Yeah. Right. And they want to know what I'm doing, where I'm doing it, where am I keeping my money, and how can they access it. Mm-hmm. That, and I don't even know who they is, by the way. When you guys learn that one, tell me, please.
Yeah.
But they are definitely watching.
Yeah. That you actually touched on it like the very beginning when you were talking about China, and to be honest, I mean, hold on 1 second. I got you in a little bit of a shadow. I'm going to do a thing here real quick. Let's go ahead and make you. Hold on here. I got this.
Thank you.
This is easy. This is totally.
I was
easy.
fading.
There we go. You were fading into the darkness. But you touched on it a little bit with China, the most transparent way possible. The government always wants to know, how can I make money on this thing? They have capital flight laws in place. They want you to have business transactions to actually get money out of the system. Wow, she is just persistent. Hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I'm trying to speak. Can I talk now? Yeah, okay. She's just pawing at my leg. I cannot think like this. It's too cute. But they are the most transparent and obvious explanation for even how the U.S. government and the European governments work in terms of wanting to control the flow of money within their system to make sure it's not leaving their nest. Because if it leaves their nest, they need it to be a taxable event. There's taxable events whenever you change hands with any U.S. dollar thing, unless it's black market stuff. And let's be honest, same exact thing. They only care that money laundering exists is because nobody reports on it. And you can't make it a taxable event. If the cartels actually probably filed their taxes well, they wouldn't be that big of a deal anymore. I mean, they would still be a big deal because, social good or whatever. But at the same time, if the government was if the government was getting their 32% capital gains cut on it, they would probably be a little bit slower to act on a lot of things. Mafia had the same problems, right? They got Al Capone on tax evasion. I mean, let's just how many bodies did he put in the ground and they got him on tax evasion? Let's not. That's what it comes down to. And that's, if you want to talk about the priorities of what the government body's like, it is about taxation. I love this. This is a fun conversation. But one of the things, that I wanted to kind of throw at you, a little curveball, right? Because you and I are in agreement about the whole Libra situation. They went about it wrong. Corporations absolutely want to get their hands on this thing, and they want to leverage their user base, which basically are nations, borderless nations of bodies that have global reach, right? Like Agoda, they love their people, they love their users. Their users are their citizens in a way.
Right.
But this is a stretch, and I'm no Jeff Bezos, but I'm going to talk about Amazon, and we did bring them up a little bit, just out of circumstance, which is really fun. But let me give you a really quick thing here, real quick. That's the Amazon chart from 1998 to today. Just throwing that out there.
You made my point.
I mean, wow, right? So just throwing that out there, that, wow, should have bought it back then. But Amazon right now, they own Twitch, they own Discord, they own Amazon, they own a few other things, they own Whole Foods, right? They have grocery stores. So honestly, they have entertainment under their belt, they have communications under their belt, they have commerce, and they have grocery. And they have a few other things like logistics and warehousing and real estate properties and computer power through AWS and these other fun stuffs. And they, on the Twitch platform, this is their video game streaming platform that is all the rage because kids don't watch TV anymore. They watch video game streamers, they watch video games, they watch YouTube, they watch whatever. They consume bits of serialized information, but they like just chatting and IRL stuff. They like real reality, getting to know somebody because of human disconnect through digital devices, reconnecting to somebody through a digital device, whatever. Not to get all psychological on everybody that's watching, sorry, but that's just the way it's working for children these days. So in lieu of going outside to play with your friends, you watch your favorite streamer play a video game and you get excited when they do well. And that is a really good model for entertainment consumption currently, and that's happening underneath Amazon's umbrella. On that umbrella, they have something called biddies, and biddies are a way to transact from the watcher to the publisher, a denomination of value that can be translated from point A to point B. Biddies. And with biddies, the more biddies you get, the more reputation you have and the better person you are on Twitch, and therefore you're elevated as a publisher, so you are incentivized, of course, to really appreciate and consume biddies. It's also more secure because if you were to give a tip through like PayPal, for example, you could back that out, right? You get your thank you, you get your marketing bit or whatever, you get your little bit of ego boost as a viewer when they say, oh, thanks, James, for the $50 tip. I really appreciate it. Here's a shout out to you and, everything you have going on at PALcapital, right? And then you go, cool, and then you submit a claim from PayPal and get that money back, right? So that happens quite a bit in the internet because everybody's brave when they have a keyboard and screen in front of them, and they don't mind ripping people off. So biddies is a one-way transaction that cannot be refunded. And so it's more safe and secure for the publishers to receive. And right now it is not called a currency. It is not called a cryptocurrency, and it doesn't live on a blockchain, right? But for all intents and purposes, it is exactly what Facebook probably should have come out with, because what they have now is their users are transacting a currency between one another in a fashion that they trust, and it establishes reputation when they receive more of it. These are all really good things for people to actually get, right? So Amazon is already on its road to what the Libra should have been out of the gate, which is unfortunate. And biddies have been around for a long time. And they're becoming more and more prevalent on the platform as time goes forward. And all they have to do is flip the switch and say you can pay for things on Amazon with biddies, which means you can get your groceries and all your consumer items right from Amazon by streaming video games online and being watched by people and receiving biddies without ever dealing with a governing body. You could be anywhere in the world and get them.
Let me take this one step further. So
yeah, go for it.
If Libra doesn't happen, or it has to significantly change, I've been saying for the last couple of years that I think the largest financial institution in the world is going to be Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the reason for that is it's related to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The reason for that is they have actually a defensible part of their model that nobody else has. Everyone else is software, which is replicatable, which is relatively inexpensive to create, is low barriers to entry. The only barrier to entry is audience, really.
Yeah.
And so, but Amazon can deliver anything to your door within 24 hours. And essentially nobody else can do that right now, globally on the scale that they do it.
Yep.
And so if they were to announce something called the Amazon, and the Amazon, and if you go to your Amazon account today, they already have a wallet, right? Because when you check out, it says, do you want to use your dollars, your bank accounts, your Amex miles, your Amazon points, your Chase whatevers, your airline miles. They basically already give you a wallet where you can choose different currencies to use, most of which are tokenized data, if not crypto. Mm-hmm. And so it'd be very easy for them to, first of all, put Bitcoin, whatever, up there. That's obvious. But they could also put up there something called the Amazon. And the Amazon could be run by smart contract to look at all your other stores of value and give you back a number of Amazons that you have available to you that they're willing to let you use. They could then price everything on Amazon in Amazons. And you would then be able to fluidly use the home equity your home equity value, the excess value in your car, your bank account, your crypto wallet, or any other source that you wanted to use. And they could then take care of the number one problem in crypto, which is what the hell do I do with this stuff? Yeah. Right. And so they could turn that into, what do you want? Where do you want it? I'll get it to you tomorrow. Yeah. Right. And so I think that's an incredibly valuable. I can't imagine that they're not salivating over that and trying to figure out how to do it in a way that doesn't screw up the way that Facebook screwed up.
I mean, absolutely. Like you're a very smart individual. I would like to think that I'm not stupid, but like Jeff Bezos is crazy smart in a way that he strategizes and sees things down the road and does stuff in ways that is strategic, right? Their plans to buy Whole Foods is like 14 months out, right? It was sprinkled so lightly.
How smart was that?
It was incredibly brilliant, right? I mean, like the whole situation of partnering with UPS and FedEx and then slowly weeding them out of the process and basically consuming UPS with the amount of volume that Amazon is processing with their packages. And just the way that Amazon does business is cancerous. It reminds me of the way the Bells actually took over telecom, like before the 80s. But it's not a bad cancer in a way. It's bad for it. Well, I mean, it's textbook capitalism. It's basically the race to the monopoly that you're talking about. But if they had these mechanisms in place, the Amazon, for example, people could make their goods, manufacture their stuff, get their supplies from Amazon to create something, turn it back around, make it a product fulfillable by Amazon, and get Amazon's return. Right. And that is exactly what the economy is. You take grass, you feed it to lambs, you get stuff for it, you sell lambs, and you get clams back, and you get more lambs. I mean, that's exactly how the economy goes.
But also, again, going back to fractals and history repeating itself and people being the same, right?
Yeah.
Think about how we talked about M-Pesa and how people, gain self-sovereign control over their currency and their value by stockpiling minutes. If you replace minutes with Amazons, right, it's the same thing.
Exactly.
It's just the same thing happening over and over again. And that's why I think it's a natural evolution for where we're going. I think it's going to be very hard for the system to avoid, that inevitability.
Oh, the system moves at such a pace that, like, technology has allowed pretty much anybody with scale to come in and just basically eat their lunch. Like, it's not, and the scale is there now that people trust the internet. I mean, imagine Uber in the 90s. That would have never happened, right? But like, now that people actually trust the internet openly, probably too much in some regards, in fact, definitely too much in most regards. But now that we openly provide financial information, our social lives, a lot of our own consumer-based data on it, our emotions, our thoughts and feelings on things, all this stuff on these platforms, including all of our purchases and what we do with those purchases, where we go and who we spend time with, all of that stuff is in the internet. The government would have loved this kind of surveillance like 60 years ago. And granted, they can look at it and pay attention to it now, but it doesn't take much to leap over to the financial aspect of it, which, like cryptocurrency is exposing it, corporations take advantage of it, and I can see where it's going. Like, it's an interesting take. I like it. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think that it's actually going to be granted, there's, like you said, one or two ways it's going to go about it. The euro collapses, crypto is going to rise. Like, whatever. Like, flat out. I mean, it won't be a good day for everybody, but at the same time, at least there's an avenue that people can still leverage value in something. But corporations circumventing the need for government bodies of Federal Reserve currency of some sorts, or even any government-backed currency for that matter. Because why not? It's not backed by anything, right? There isn't I don't think there's a single currency on the planet Earth that's actually backed by anything other than it existing and the government saying that it's worth something, right?
I don't know if that's right or not. It's probably true. There's some that are backed by dollars and dollar reserves, but I don't know how valuable that is. But Chase, this is already happening. Like, Chase announced the JP Morgan coin, JPM, whatever it's called. And so
and Wells Fargo doing the same thing as well. Like last week, they had a thing about that.
How do you know that when you do your transaction on your Chase app, how do you know you're moving dollars? You have no idea, right? You're probably moving JP Morgan coins. It'd be a lot cheaper and more intelligent for them to do that.
Yeah, cheaper for them, for sure, right? Because if they're not going through SWIFT, they're going to be a lot happier because that's cutting out a middleman. That's costing them millions.
I went through a transaction yesterday. I was a shareholder in the largest social media network in Latin America, and I invested in them 3-4 years ago. They had 60 million users, and I figured someone would buy them for the audience. Of course, I thought someone would pay $1 a user, and ended up they raced from 60 down to 15 million. And they sold for less than $1. So there goes my investment thesis. But they did get bought, for their audience.
Oh, congratulations.
When they broke the deal, and they had to distribute the funds, I had like 20 investors in the deal, and I spent a day and a half chasing down wire transfers.
Oh God!
And God forbid one of the numbers, wasn't one of the addresses wasn't fully correct at Wells Fargo. They had 6 levels for the benefit of for some reason. So they're just keeping the wallet address, and so we had to chase down a couple $100,000 for one of my clients. And it was really exacerbating. And we were being told during the process that there was nothing they could do for us. Right? Wow. They can't help us. They need to wait. We need to wait 5 days to show there's actually a problem. Yeah. Right? And after 5 days, they would get involved their special forensic blah 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 unit, who would make sure that it takes another 30 days to tell us that they're really not sure how they're going to help us. And we, thank God, we ended up getting a resolution after 2.5 days. But I don't have to say what would have happened if it was a crypto transaction, right? I would have just had my money.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you would have been able to watch the transaction happen through the block and then be like, well, there it is. If you got the addresses right. But
by the way, we paid for the we had to pay for the good luck of having to deal with this system. And being told
the honor of dealing with it, right? You got thank you for letting us go through this archaic system of transacting money across borders. Let me give you a gob of money. Exactly. James, I want to thank you. Our time is up. This has been, I love this kind of stuff. Just conversations about the world and crypto.
Talk about my business. What's going on here?
Did we not? We didn't actually. You know what? Before we go, we go, I know. Hold on one second. I want to bring up the website real quick, though. This is PALcapital, PALcapital.com. And James, if you would be so kind as to give your elevator pitch to take us out, that
Sure.
would be awesome. Because this has been kick-ass. And I think we just had too much fun and we got away from the business side of things. So
It's all good.
take
It's
it away.
all good. PALcapital partners with investors and entrepreneurs to create liquidity strategies, which are typically around businesses which are benefiting from the digitization of information, which currently has to do with the employment of distributed ledger technologies. We are right now, I think, introducing what will become a very interesting asset class in that we've found a way to have a publicly listed company which can invest directly in distributed ledger and tokens and other forms that will be available to institutions and family offices, where you can buy and sell a publicly traded share without having to understand anything about DLT, anything about wallets, and where you will not have to go through the KYC AML nightmare that's been involved. You'll be able to go to a symbol in Charles Schwab and buy it and sell it with direct knowledge of what you're purchasing. And if you're interested, please contact me at PALcapital.com.
And that is, one, that's awesome. Two, I'm so glad you came on the show. I really do appreciate your time. And until next week, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Enrique Gutierrez. I was joined today by James Haft, PALcapital at PALcapital.com. Come on by, check us out, sync.tech. Just stay on the internet, just go everywhere. PALcapital.com, sync.tech, over to Twitter. Check us out over there. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel, less shaky cam. I need to get that handled. My webcam is, anyways. And the puppies, I'll have the puppies on. Like, honestly, they like napping. So I'm sorry, guys. I know you guys like to you don't care about any of the stuff we just said. You just wanted to see my dogs. However, next week, I promise. Peace out. Happy trading.